All right, let's do this. I don't know if any of you noticed the difference between what this was announced as, between what the talk really is. I said test driving JavaScript with Jasmine. I've kind of tweaked it since then. Basically, this was a live coding presentation. Then after going to like RailsConf for 3 days and seeing not a single presentation live coding, I wondered if I was doing it wrong. So this way we get a lot more material and you don't watch me type and mess up and ask Vim commands and whatnot. So just testing with JavaScript. I'll cover a little TDD flow in the beginning. Then we'll move on to just see what this is and how cool it is and whatnot. I have a lot of slides, but there are a lot of screenshots, so we'll kind of blow through them. So don't be afraid by the number in the corner. Where's my mouse? All right, I'm Tim Tyrrell. I work at People Admin, 2 blocks up the street. I'm a Rails developer. Been there for a few months. Just so you guys know, People Admin, you've probably heard of us, maybe you have no idea what we do. We're a SaaS talent management application. We have about 700 customers, higher education, government, nonprofit. Like if you go, for example, you go to like jobs.texastech.edu, that's us. So we have the internal and external all job talent management workflow and stuff. So that is us. And I have a website with not much on it, but I like the domain name. And I'm on the Twitter. Here's the agenda. I wanted to let you guys know what we're covering, so you set your expectations correctly. Like I said, briefly discuss TDD, talk about Jasmine, show some syntax, use Jasmine with a bunch of different scenarios, and then move on to see where CoffeeScript fits in and other things like that. Just to give you a big, broad understanding of what this is that I'm about to talk about, and where you can use it and how easily you can use it. All right, so basically, why unit test JavaScript? Okay, I'm sure a fair amount in this room, well, hopefully more than half, test code, test backend code, but client-side code, it's a little harder to deal with. It seems to be almost a Wild West there in the views. A lot of procedural code, non-modular, very tough to test. It's a good dumping ground. It can be very, very complex, just a lot of different UI things going on. Until recently, you know, JavaScript maybe a few years ago wasn't taken as seriously, and obviously now it's just a force to be reckoned with. So it must be given the respect that it's due, just like the other languages that we work with on a regular basis, unless it's just this anyway. But respect the language. It's production code. You test production code. JavaScript also, again, since it's coming with such a driving force now, it's such a bigger part of our applications now than maybe it was 5 or so years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. Now it's such a huge piece that so much important logic or functionality is inside the JavaScript. You have to treat it with respect and make sure it's tested. All right, TDD. I'll cover this briefly. People may be sick of hearing this, or you've heard it a billion times, or you've never heard it. The point is, you write a failing test, you make it pass, you make it better. I mean, that's the general gist of it. You don't write code until you have a failing test first. That's the basic premise behind it. I'll cover this briefly, like I said, and we'll move on. Why do I like TDD? That's the one thing I wanted to cover. For one thing, it's good on your attention span. All right, you have a failing test, right? So you know what you're working on. You're not going off in a corner, following a tangent, you know, going down a rabbit hole. You have a test, it's failing, you make it pass, you move on. It helps you design your API. You are the first person to actually utilize your code because you're writing a test against it. So you'll see right away if you have a clunky API, or maybe you're not passing in all the parameters you need or whatnot. Because, like I said, you are the first user of your API. Another reason why I like it, it helps me sleep at night. You can deploy code and not be scared shitless is going to break. You can refactor big chunks of your application and not be worried that you're breaking other areas. You know, it allows you to keep moving with confidence and do good work and move fast. Like I said, moving on that point, it helps me move fast. When you can make a change in your code, run your tests, and move on instead of popping up the UI, logging in, going to a page, looking at things, it really, really helps your flow, keeps you on task of what you're working on, you're not switching context, and also keeps you more productive. Last point, why I like it, is it just gives you confidence in refactorings. If you have a bunch of code without tests around it, and hey, go change how this thing works, you know, it's a very, very frightening thing. But if you know that you can change a lot of internals, for example, and then still run your tests, they pass, you know your goal. You know, you're still putting the right stuff in, getting the right stuff out. What happens behind the scenes doesn't matter. And you can quickly do it without opening up UI, clicking things, and whatnot. So I'm just going to do a little TDD through slides for just the first example of Jasmine. Then we'll move on to a few other scenarios. Uncle Bob, this point really drove home when I read this. There's only one way to go truly fast. Do the best job you can. Anything else is slower. All right. People say testing slows you down, right? Well, you know what also slows you down is when you deploy something and it breaks. When you try to refactor some code and it breaks half your application. That's what slows you down. When you can keep moving fast, run your test suite, keep moving on without switching context, that's where you truly can move fast and not get slowed down with little things breaking and whatnot. Yes, you can spike and prototype without tests. That makes sense. You have to know which way you're going before you put this test harness around it. Otherwise, it's a little uncomfortable to move out of that test harness. But once you know where you're going, testing helps you get there. And one thing I want to point out, testing is not easy, okay? I'm not up here preaching saying, hey, this is easy, go do it. You know, you should be doing it now. It's super easy. People that have been doing this for 5, 10, 20 years, they're still learning new stuff every day, every month, every year. It's complicated stuff. But once you start doing it, or maybe to a point where you get blown away by a deployment and you go, I'm going to deploy something, I don't know if it's going to work, I have no idea. That's when you go, all right, we need to buckle down, focus on this, and make it work. And that's when it really pays off in the end. But it's hard. You got to work at it, but it really, really is worth it. And of course, the obligatory thing that's all over the internet. I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production. That's how a lot of people do it, and I've heard people around in Austin even tell me that. When my code's in production, that's when I test it. Because they assume at that point they know what it is. They don't have to break their test suite around it to change it. But to get to this point, you want to know your code works and will work, keep working in production. And that's why testing is important. And I'm done talking about TDD. All right, why Jasmine? All right, what is Jasmine? Okay, first off, there's other unit testing frameworks for JavaScript. QUnit is one that I'm aware of. It's the one that jQuery uses to test their the jQuery project. Jasmine's written by Pivotal Labs. I'm sure you've heard of Pivotal Tracker. This is the company that developed this. The reason I got into Jasmine is because as a Rails developer, Jasmine is, well, Pivotal Labs is a Rails consulting company, basically. So it's really geared toward Rails initially. I saw how easy it was to set it up, and then I went with it. It has a very familiar RSpec syntax, which you'll see. So I'm actually going to compare all the Jasmine code syntax with RSpec code. So if you don't know RSpec, you'll learn a little bit about that. If not, it'll just demonstrate how very similar they are, and how I see the value of that is where you're not switching context, because it's the same structure, almost the same syntax for your RSpec unit testing with Ruby and your JavaScript unit testing with Jasmine. It has Ruby gems for getting things up and going for Node, Ruby, Rails, etc. But you don't need Ruby for this. Okay, I'll say that you do not need Ruby. It's a standalone JavaScript framework that you can use and plop in and use it to test your JavaScript. It's very easy to plug into a continuous integration server. It does not require the DOM, so you can test your functions in isolation. That's one of the unit testing frameworks, testing in isolation. And it does not depend on any other JavaScript frameworks. So you don't need Dojo or jQuery to use this. It's standalone JavaScript. No Ruby, no jQuery to use this. But you can, and it makes it easier. And we'll talk about that. All right. Jasmine is not an integration testing framework. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term. Jasmine is more like a JUnit, RSpec, NUnit, test unit type framework. It's not Selenium. It's not Cucumber. It's not Capybara. It's for testing pieces in isolation and not your stack. So that's the difference there. They have different reasons that you want to do both, but Jasmine unit testing is more just for working on specific components and flushing out what you want to do with them. All right, we're going to go through a few slides of syntax. I hope you guys can read this. We'll see. This is the basic structure. The differences here, for example, with RSpec you have a block. With Jasmine you have anonymous functions. So you're passing in what you're describing, anonymous function you describe. So it's sort of like this is a best practice, Carbon 5 in San Francisco. They say you want to have the method name, the class, the method name. The pound sign means it's an instance method as opposed to a class method. If it's a class method, you do a period. So you know what context you're in. You're in this class, this method, and then what are you testing on it. You can, of course, use some more describes or whatnot to say what you're really doing with it. But we're just going to do some simple contrived calculator type examples here. With RSpec, you can also use more aliases and things like that. But Jasmine is just very straightforward. Describe what you're doing, calculate, add, and it should return 2, and we're going to have the test inside here. So we'll go a few more pages of syntax. This is the teardown, build up and teardown, before and afters that you have inside your specs. You see in RSpec how you have the instance methods inside those blocks. In Jasmine, just like normal JavaScript, you have to have the variable declared outside, otherwise you can't, you can't access it inside here. You can't, of course, declare it in here and get it here. With Ruby, it's magic, so you can do it. Build up and tear down. This is for, in case you're not familiar with this, if you have a bunch of expectations you're performing, you can do a bunch of setup code before that. And after each before, it'll read it up. So if you're messing with it inside the expectation, it'll blow away, redo it again. So it's sort of like a fresh for each expectation. Teardowns, you don't do very much, but they're there if you need them. Expectations. With RSpec, you see inside the it, we're doing something up. We're calling an add method on it and saying dot should equal and dot should not. In Jasmine, you actually have an expect method. You pass what you want into it and you chain. So everything in Jasmine is based off this expect method you see right here, and then it's to equal. If you want to negate it, you pop a dot not in front of it. So, and I also want to point out that I'm doing 2 expectation checks, assertions inside one method. You don't want to do that because if one blows up, you don't know which is messed up, and you want to have them all separate. So I just want to point that out. This is just for keeping space. So like I said, expect, put your stuff in there, chain on it to test it. RSpec, you see they have a bunch of different methods. So Jasmine is actually simpler in that respect. Matchers, you don't have to read all these. These are the other matchers you can use, equal to be null. There's to be truthy and falsy, if you guys see that. That's actually the triple equal check. Just want to point that out. It's not checking if something's true or false. It's doing the more JavaScript 3 equal. I don't want to explain the JavaScript group, but it's more of an exact.
Is that the truthy does that? Or?
Yes, the truthy and falsy is the 3 equal. Okay. Yes. So I wanted to just point that out. Otherwise, you could just see if it's true and 2 equal, probably.
It's not the other way around?
Yeah, it should be double.
Should be equal to be triple, and to be true, these 2.
To be true, these 3.
To be truthy means that it's a difference of an if.
It takes the then clause, not the else clause. What about to equal versus to be?
I think B might be a type check. I'm not familiar with all the matchers. I just want to throw them up here so you know they exist. This presentation. I have not used all of them. A lot of it's just to equal this check. Stubbing out. Of course, there's mocking type stubbing functionality inside of it. As you see with the RSpec, you do a stub exclamation point, the method you're stubbing out, and a return if you want to. So we're adding 1 plus 1 and making it 3 because stub's sort of intercepting that and throwing a 3 back. With Jasmine, it's something called spies. So here we're spying on the calc, a variable there, and the add method on it, when that's called, we return a 3. So it's the same type of thing, stubbing out, intercepting what it is, and you can optionally return something if you want to. Here I am, so if you call add, return 3. Inside expect, calc, add, 1 plus 1. This really intercepts it, returns 3. So it's pretty easy stuff. And that is it. So let's move on. We're going to show where you can use Jasmine, how easy it is to set up, and what different scenarios you can use it with. Okay. This is vanilla JavaScript, as I called it. This means, we're not using Ruby, jQuery, anything. It's just you have Jasmine and you're going to test your JavaScript with it. So if you just go to that URL and download it, unzip it, you'll have this. They actually have some default examples inside there. They have a few functions and a few specs just to show you how it works. And they actually have an example of a custom matcher. I actually blew those away from my example to show you my specs. But this is the default folder structure. You can tweak it, but this is where they're going to look to actually look for your functions and look for your specs to test against. So this is straight up download, extract, put my files in there. All right. I'm pulling up this spec.runner.html file, and it's using these files here, and also looking inside those folders because it knows what to look into to run the specs. Okay, I don't have any. The files are empty currently, so 0 specs, 0 failures. So I'm not using web server here. I'm just right-click, open it in Chrome or Firefox. So I'm going to write a spec for this, right? We declare the variable as we saw earlier. We set this up. This is actually pointless here, of course, because I only have one assertion, so this could be in there. But generally you have a lot more assertions, so it's just I can't help myself in doing that. We're expecting 1 + 1 = 2, right? No sweat. All right. Go back to the browser, refresh. 1 spec, 2 failures. Calc is undefined, which is the variable, and also calculator. It has no idea what calculator is, right? It doesn't exist yet. All right, I'm going to stub this out in my calculator.js file, which was blank. So now I throw it in there. 1 spec, 1 failure. Because now it knows what calculator is, but now we call calc.add is not a function, because I just stubbed out the function called calculator. We'll throw this in there. One of the ways to add a method to this function. Put 2 numbers in, return. Oh, wow. Whoops. Well, it passed, right? Because I'm doing 1 + 1. Yeah. I'm not testing for 1 + 2 there, just 1 for 1. So since I'm throwing 1 and 1 in there, it passes. So that's it. So we had our failing tests, made it pass, and moved on. So yeah, if I wrote a second assertion, I would have found that, but I did not. So that's it. That's a little TDD flow. How would you use Jasmine with Ruby? You saw before, remember, no Ruby. That was just straight JavaScript downloaded. With Ruby, it is a gem, so it has a lot more pieces set up for you, which lets you generate stuff to use. Gem install Jasmine. Installs a bunch of stuff. Selenium, RSpec, whatnot. From there, I'm going to move into a folder I created. And from here, I can either run rake Jasmine, which fires up a web server that I can use to go look at the browser, as you saw a minute or two ago, or rake Jasmine:CI. This is to run the automated CI task with Selenium. So this is where you can put it on your CI server and have it run and see what passes or fails. This is a default folder structure. It's generated with the Jasmine init. So you can tweak this, of course, but it knows to look in public JavaScripts for the existing files. And these come in there when you do it, so you have to delete them or use them for your examples. Spec helper, this is where you put custom matchers. So you can do to be awesome. Write your own custom matcher. And the rest is just config and folder structure setup. So no sweat, Jasmine init, we've got it. I run rake Jasmine. This will start my web server. And then I can go in and hit localhost, because we know the port, because it says it right here. It's listed on there. We know we can pull it up, look at it, and run our tests. So it comes with 5 specs in there, the player and song functions, and it shows you if they pass or not. So pretty easy to get going. If you run the rake Jasmine CI, normal looking syntax, ... tells you if they pass or fail. This is where you run it on your CI, for example. Or if you don't want it to pop up in your browser every time, you can just run this and keep your workflow going. All right, no sweat. Let's move on a little bit. Jasmine with jQuery. All right, it's a little different here. Jasmine jQuery. So this is another, Jasmine has a bunch of libraries that give you basically a lot more matchers. So with jQuery, it's a bunch of DOM matchers, right? With straight up Jasmine, it's just testing objects and functions, are they equal and whatnot. But this is basically, hey, is it hidden, empty, does it exist? All the general matchers that you want to have, checking DOM elements. And as you have jQuery with it, you can use it really easily. this is the example I'm using. Dave's not here, so I can't harass him, but lettering.js, easy to use span injector. I'll show you what it does, and I'll show you how we can test it. That's a picture of him. I was going to make a joke, but he's not here. That's my joke now. Okay, so here's our HTML. So we have H1 class, fancy title. This is stripped right from the lettering.js GitHub site. So we have a header with text, right, with a class. With lettering, we can select that class and run lettering on it, which gives us this. So it goes from some title up there. So this is the result. So basically, splits a span between each character, so you can easily manipulate it and do cool lettering, cool typography type stuff with it. So that's what it does. So all right, how do we test this, right? Another thing about unit testing is it's not just for driving out your design. It's also for pinning down existing functionality. So let's say he wants to refactor this, make some changes to it. He doesn't want to break his stuff. He doesn't want to keep popping the browser open and checking things to make sure it works or not. You can pin down existing functionality. So I have a few contrived examples of how to use it with jQuery. I'm using the initial spec runner, so I'm not using Ruby with this at all whatsoever. I just extracted this from the website, and I threw a couple extra files in there if you see. I have jQuery, I have Jasmine jQuery, and I have lettering. Those are the additions. Also, I have a lettering spec, which is where I'm going to write my specs to see if this works or not. And I also have a fixtures folder where I can put HTML that I'm going to test against. And these are folder structures defined by convention with Jasmine. So I'm going to go tweak that one file, the specrunner.html. I'm going to say, hey, instead I want to use jQuery with Jasmine jQuery, with lettering, and then my lettering spec. So throw them in there. So if I pop that open, I can run it and see what works. Excuse me. And here's my spec. I'm writing before each. This is where I can load my fixture, and it'll go down into that folder that was defined before. I forget what it was called, but JavaScript's fixtures. It'll look in there and grab it and use that. Or I can just say, hey, set the fixture, use this HTML, and just throw it in there. Then I'm going to call my, select it, do my lettering on it, and I'm good to go. So I've got my DOM that I can mess around with. So I say, hey, I mean, this is contrived, but I just want to show you what you can do. It should be visible, right? So I have to throw in actually a jQuery selector to be visible. I say, hey, it should have 10 spans, all right? So I'm doing a, select fancy title. And if you're curious what HTML was, remember it's up here, you can eyeball it real quick. So get that class, get all those spans below it, and how many are there? There's 10. It should contain an S, so I'm getting the first span, get the text of that first span. And see if it's a capital S, and it is, because that's the first character right there. And then, it should have a class of char1. I'm just showing you, this is common jQuery type stuff you do to select things, but with the DOM there, with what we're testing, it's easy to just select it and test against it. So this is how you do it. Any questions? I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
So when you're running something like this that requires a DOM, do you need to send to your browser if you're doing it from a CI build? Or can you actually test it? Do you have to have a browser?
I think that there's headless methods. There's other ways to do it without that, but generally, I think generally the CI does use a browser. A lot of the Rake Jasmine CI uses Selenium by default.
Okay.
I think you can swap that out, but that's the default way to do it. Okay, Jasmine with Rails. So Jasmine inside the gem file, you bundle it. You can optionally initialize it, right, to generate those folders for you, or you can put them there yourself. Rake Jasmine does what it did before, where it runs the specs. Where it opens a browser for you, where you can refresh the page. See, I'm inside a Rails project, Jasmine with Rails. There's a spec folder. Inside the spec folder, I have my inside the spec JavaScript folder, I have my JavaScript files. This is the thing that might look familiar. This is generated from before. Same stuff. and this inside my Rails project, public JavaScripts, my normal Rails stuff, plus a couple default files that come with it. So if you notice, you didn't see Jasmine in there because that's all encompassed inside the gem. So if you run rake Jasmine, you can hit the browser, run your tests. All right, this is where I wanted to have the Dr. Phil moment with you guys. I don't know how this looked to you. I don't know if this looked easy or hard or complicated or whatnot, but there's actually easier ways to do this, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. This is the default Jasmine gem and what you can do with it. But there's also something called evergreen, which actually encompasses a lot of this functionality and makes it a lot easier to use. So I'm going to show you how that works. This is not the actual pic for it, but I found that on the internet when I was Googling, so I wanted to give you a visual. There it is. Gem install evergreen. You do need Ruby for this. Well, that's not a problem. But it'll be easier, it's worth it in the end. So the evergreen default folder paths, okay? So I'm in a folder, right? I didn't go in this folder and initialize anything. I just have a gem on my system. So inside some random, folder on my system that has that gem in a path, I have a public folder with a function in it, and a spec folder with a JavaScript folder with a spec in it. And if you wonder why it's like spec JavaScripts, it's because you can have like spec, models. You have different other code you're testing inside your project. It's just a way to, organize it, obviously. So by convention, this is the default. You can change it. So this is a little more clean. I like this with Evergreen. Less stuff in the way. You don't have a bunch of libraries with things going on. And then when you run evergreen serve, it fires up the server, and you can go check it out and refresh to your heart's content. So with the gem installed, you have access to the server so you can look at this stuff. So I think that's cool. Also, evergreen run runs it in a with Selenium, or you could swap that out for Capybara, or some other method that does actually drives the browser. So this way you can use it in your CI server, or just if you don't want to open your browser and check it out. I think that's pretty cool. With Rails, same type of stuff. I'm not going to belabor this. You throw it in your gem file. From your gem file, you would say, hey, just use it in dev or test. You don't want to use it in production, of course, because you can hit this localhost if you have a web server going and see your specs that you just saw a minute ago with this. And also, rake spec JavaScript runs this. So really easy to get going, and I think it's pretty cool. What about CoffeeScript, right? Everyone's really excited about it. I think it's pretty cool. With Evergreen, CoffeeScript functionality is built in. So what I can do is, I installed CoffeeScript. This is how I did it. brew install node.js, curl, blah, 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 install npm, and then npm install CoffeeScript. So I installed Node in CoffeeScript, and also the Node package management system. Rockin', cool. Okay, so I'm going to, just going back to that folder I had before, I'm not generating anything or doing anything crazy. I have a calculator underscore spec.coffee. All your specs must have underscore spec. That's the convention for Evergreen. Then we just throw in with the .coffee in there, right? So what we can do is write this in CoffeeScript. This is not different. This is how the other file is too. With Evergreen, you have to say, hey, where's the function that I'm actually testing against? So you throw a require at the top. No big deal. Then CoffeeScript, so this is a little cleaner syntax for Jasmine, right? Describe calculator before each with the, I don't have to have the do syntax. It's more, white space based. And CoffeeScript, look, it's working. Expect calc.add 1 equal 2, right? And then I do evergreen run, and it works. So just by using evergreen, I can use CoffeeScript to test my JavaScript. And I think that's pretty cool. That was easy. I did gem install Jasmine, and then it works. Like, I did nothing else besides run evergreen serve or evergreen run to actually, run the tests, run the specs. So I think that is really, really cool and really easy.
So the add
That's
sign,
how I was when I did it. I was really excited.
The add sign gets compiled down to this dot and then whatever the name of the variable is, right?
I don't know how CoffeeScript was written.
If I remember.
I know it gets compiled to JavaScript.
then you wouldn't have to declare that variable in your JavaScript Jasmine before and after. You know, you were talking about calc needing to be declared before. Maybe you can just do this.calc. Maybe that'll work.
Yeah, it's possible that I'd invalidate CoffeeScript.
I'm just wondering.
Yeah, it's highly possible. I was really excited though. I mean, this took me like 5 minutes to do. This is super simple. Test my JavaScript with CoffeeScript. So I think that's pretty cool. You can use, they have, Jasmine has, of course, things for Node, for any other variety of thing. Maven, they have libraries for everything. So hey, install Jasmine-Node, you run Node specs, bam, you're testing Node.js. So I mean, they have libraries to test everything. You just have to have, use Jasmine. Other cool utilities that I've noticed, Summer Breeze. This is by Noel Rappin, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. Chicago Optiva developer. He's the guy who wrote the Rails test prescriptions book. Basically what this does, if you recall before I had that fixtures folder, where I had to say like, hey, use this DOM, use this HTML to test. What this does is that you can say, hey, for Rails, this is for Rails, I'm sorry. For Rails, you go, hey, go to this controller and get this view, and I want to use that DOM. I don't want to have to recreate my DOM and keep it in sync in my test folders. So I think that is really cool. It's something that came out fairly recently. I've been watching it. Does that make sense what I said? You don't have to create the HTML files in your test folder. I mean, you just say, hey, use the view I already have out there, and you can select off that and use it. Another one, Rosie. It's a factory for building JavaScript objects. So this is like Factory Girl. Or basically what this is let's say you have your test and you have like a user object or whatever, and you don't want to really create this user object every time. You have a factory with some default objects that you can just say, hey, build user, build whatever. And then you can shoot them out there, and it simplifies your life with unit testing. So this is one thing I noticed. So basically, a lot of the libraries that used to exist for like Ruby and things, they're now in JavaScript. So it's pretty cool to make your life easier with testing. And check this out, try-jasmine.heroku.com. You actually go here, and you can have the spec and the source, and you hit try Jasmine, and it runs it, just like we had before. So you can go without installing anything at your home or whatnot, installing Ruby if you don't use it. And also look, that's CoffeeScript. You can just switch it. You can actually, this is my CoffeeScript, that's how I knew it worked, right? Threw it in here, tweak the code, running against this.as it. Sorry about that. But yeah, you can switch between CoffeeScript, use the Jasmine jQuery, move around different plugins just in your browser. So it's really, really cool. And I'm done. I have a speaker rate I can send out, tweet it out or whatnot. I appreciate feedback. If it sucks, let me know. Too many slides, let me know. Whatever. If you liked it, let me know. I have a bunch of references. I need to add some more. But there's a lot of material out here. This stuff is really taken off. Jasmine, really big in the Rails community right now. But also you saw that it's really easy to use just CoffeeScript testing JavaScript. There's Node.js testing. It's a lot of functionality. It's really easy to use. And I hope you see that it's freaking easy to use. You have no excuses now not to test your JavaScript. You got to write it maybe a little more modular, a little more easier to test, less procedural, but it's worth it. It's easy, and that's it. So, do you guys have any questions?
Can you run it without a browser with the V8 engine or
ENV, whatever? Yeah. Other drivers instead of Selenium, you can swap them out and run it. Yes.
The Build Doctor on Twitter @BuildDoctor, he's got a great article running it with some JavaScript libraries, so it just runs and it'll actually spit out, if you're doing Java, it'll spit out JUnit type XML, so you can put it in your build as well. So he's called the Build Doctor on this Twitter ID. So just look for him, and then you'll find his blog, and he's got a write up on this.
You mentioned Java, so I said before there's a Maven library for this. So let's say you're using Java, you want to use this to test some JavaScript, you can pop it in there, have Maven run it in your build. I mean, it's all easy, it's all there. So there's a huge support. This is a really popular library. It's worked on a lot. It's not abandoned. I mean, it's very popular in the community. So they're really working on it and doing a good job.
There's also PhantomJS if you want to really run a headless WebKit. So it's like full WebKit.
Yeah. With evergreen, I know you can swap things out easily. So.
Zombie.
Yeah. They're coming out of the woodwork.
Zombie's actually written by a former Pivotal Labs guy.
Docs presentation, so I'll tweet it out there with my speaker rate. I'm going to go to the bar afterwards if you want to ask me anything, but I think it's pretty badass, and I hope you guys learned something today. Thanks for coming.
All right, I thought we didn't have cards, but it turns out